Welcome back to Film-Studio-Taku-in-Japan. Today we are going to talk about the GH7. GH7 finally here. Affiliate links below. Don't worry about it. So, why have we been waiting for this camera? Simple. Phase detect autofocus. That's it. Does it have better specs? Yes, marginally. But phase detect autofocus. Finally. Now, I seem to recall somebody mentioning that phase detect was coming in the GH6. Was I wrong? Technically, yes. Was I wrong? Not really. It came in the G9. Now, that should tell you something, that it was there. It was in the works. Now, I had a conversation. I live in Japan. Miscommunications happen. You know, shogunai, as the Japanese would say. Did I ruffle feathers with Panasonic? I think I did, and I'm sorry. Gomen nasai. Um, it is what it is. I'll say, had Panasonic given me a test copy of the GH6 as was promised, basically, um, yeah, maybe I wouldn't have have talked about that. It would have been an NDA and all that stuff. But yeah, I was supposed to get one. That's a whole other story. You watch my past videos, you'll know I have a little bit of history with Panasonic. My channel looks small, but my history is long. But anyways, I just want to talk a little bit here. We're not doing the spec sheet. We'll do. Here we go. The Panasonic Lumix GH7 is a highly anticipated camera that has been generating a lot of buzz in the photography and videography communities. As a flagship camera, it boasts a range of impressive features that make it an ideal choice for professionals and enthusiasts alike. It's 25 megapixels basically. It's got all kinds of nice codecs, RAW, 10-bit. High frames per second, that matters. 300 frames per second maximum. 240 frames per second if you want really nice quality. Um, what I want to talk about though with this camera is who it's for. And this is mostly positive. Hey, Panasonic, this is mostly positive. This is actually almost all positive. This is the camera that people have been waiting for. And like I said, phase detect is the key word here, but it goes beyond that. Why have people been waiting for phase detect from Panasonic for so long? Why don't they just say screw them and let Panasonic just fall to the wayside like so many other camera companies have in the past? The bottom line is the reason that people get so upset that Panasonic has taken so long for phase detect. Panasonic wasn't hated on because Panasonic sucked. Panasonic was hated on because Panasonic, in terms of specs, minus phase detect autofocus, was the best, and it is the best. Panasonic gives creators more of what they need than any other camera company, period. And no, Sony does not give them more. The A7S III is a triumph, a great camera, but Panasonic leads in specs, period. And that's why it hurts so much to see Panasonic drag their feet. Um, I get it. There's pride involved. It's not just about marketing. Contrast detect autofocus, depth to focus autofocus, as they call it. You know, there was a lot of R&D involved in that and pushing it forward and getting it so good. It really was so good. And even, who knows what this is? This is a GH2. This is what really started it all, not the GH1. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I was going to do a whole beginning rant, but I thought, keep you tuned in first. But, you know, that camera, though, the contrast detect autofocus on that camera is still faster than a lot of cameras today, including my Fuji GFX 100S, which is not known as the fastest, but it's got phase detect and it's doing a pretty good job here, I think, of keeping me in focus. Are you? Maybe. But no, it's contrast detect uh, on Panasonic cameras is very good, and for photos, I think a lot of people that's fine. For me, no, because that pulsing irritates my eye like crazy. And that's what it's about. If you don't understand the system they have, it basically focuses beyond the subject in front of it. It centers in until it gets the perfect focus, but it does it so quickly that for practical purposes for photography, it's lightning fast and very accurate. And the difference is there's no false information. What I mean by that is when you're using phase detect, it has to use a certain amount of the pixels for the actual focus system, and there's no information there, and it fills it in. If you don't know that, now you know that. Does it matter? Not really. Do you see those pixels here? Can you tell which ones are real and which ones aren't? It's a very small amount of pixels, and whatever they do, you don't notice them. For photography, maybe. That's another subject. But anyways, so that's what it is. That's what contrast detect autofocus was, what it is, what it does, and it's still in most cameras. Your camera likely, if it has phase detect, also has contrast detect, blah blah blah. Your camera likely has contrast detect as well. In fact, I can say it does, and it falls back to it in certain scenarios. I'm not going to get into those right now because that's another story. But Panasonic kept moving forward with it, and it got faster with the algorithms, and it pulsed quicker. So the pulsing time was shorter, but it was still doing it. And they were so close with the GH6. I get it, and I'm sorry, Panasonic. But, you know, like I said actually in my previous video, is I highly encourage Panasonic continue to work on it in the dark, dingy basement, as I know you were with phase detect. I am sure phase detect, Panasonic has been playing with it for years, right? But that was in their little dark, dingy basement with engineers that never see the light of day and are vitamin D deprived. And I've met them. But so that's why people were upset, because phase detect simply works, especially in Sony. Nikon is pretty good with it, and Fuji not so much. It's good when it works, and I think actually in this 100S it's probably better for video in some regards than the XH line. That's probably controversial though, right? So here's what I want to say is basically just know that's why people were pissed, and that's why Panasonic, in many people's eyes, was living in the past, dragging its feet. But you know, like I said, they worked really hard on it, and I think that the engineers that were probably working the hardest on it, they probably were sad to have to just let it go. And I think though they probably would have been fine with it years and years ago, but for whatever reason, this is where pride comes in, and Japanese businesses are known for pride blocking smart business sense. Is, you know, somebody said, "Oh no, we've put too much work into this. We got to." Either somebody didn't want to admit that, well, we put this work into it, we put this money into it, but listen, boss, if we go to phase detect, we think this is the future. We think that this will be a lot more successful. It was either that, or more likely, I think, was somebody simply said, no, we're not going to. Maybe an engineer brought it forward as an issue, and I can imagine that somebody said, oh, no, I'm not going to bring that up further the chain. It was probably somebody that didn't want to tell somebody, hey, we know we've been spending all this money on R&D for this research and development for this contrast detect system, but we think that this phase detection system is actually probably the way to go forward. Maybe that's what happened, or maybe it was just simply blind faith that contrast detect would catch up in time, but it didn't. It hurt Panasonic without a doubt. It's not to say that Panasonic hasn't been doing okay, because in the film industry they are widely used for a lot of reasons, because you don't need autofocus in film industry, though it is becoming more popular. So what I really want to talk about in this video, though, is that if you are an aspiring content creator, because all the content creators that know exactly what this camera is and know exactly why they're waiting for it, they are probably not watching my video anymore. But if you're a content creator that wants the best camera for you, and you don't know, you're looking at all these options, and very expensive options, okay, full frame options. Sony a7S III, class leading, except for now it's not. The GH7 surpasses it in almost every way. The GH7 is a more versatile camera. The Sony is full frame, but it's a low megapixel full frame. So if you're thinking, oh, that's the camera for me because I also want to do photos, I disagree, because it's not enough. It's not enough anymore. And I mean, unless you're only doing social media and you want that full frame look, then sure. But if you intend to print your stuff larger than, say, an 8 by 10, I would say no, because you're losing so much in terms of resolution, and just it's just not the same. When you have all those extra megapixels, I mean, I'm talking about 100 megapixels here, but you don't need that many. 24 is great. I rocked the Z6 from Nikon for 3 years and loved the image out of that. It's one of the best images, period, because the noise pattern is just great. On a Micro Four Thirds, it's not the same, but it's still enough, and it does matter. The G9 is one of the best looking Micro Four Thirds images, period. I'm not even talking about the G9 Mark II. I'm talking about the original G9. That's an amazing image, and it almost rivals full frame. The detail is phenomenal out of that camera, and this should be the same. So why do I say this is your camera for content creators? And I don't usually do that. I don't usually say, hey, buy this camera. I'm not saying buy it, but I'm saying that if you want to be a content creator and you want the most versatile camera that's going to help you as a creator, a tool. Don't even think of it as a camera. Think of it as a tool. Do you want the best tool? The best tool, unless you're doing crazy big landscape photography or portrait photography, not that you can't use the GH7 for portrait photography, because you can, absolutely. But unless you're really looking at high-end clients that want the best photo quality, you can absolutely use a Micro Four Thirds sensor. For video, the Micro Four Thirds sensor is in many ways superior. Audio check. I'm syncing with a Audacity 32-bit float. Did you know you can have 32-bit float in Audacity, which is a free software program? I am running through a fancy MPC Renaissance, but I don't think you need to do that to achieve 32-bit float. So why spend so much money on a recorder when you can just do it in the computer? We'll find out if this actually is good, though. But so yeah, I mean, the GH7 is a proven workhorse. How do I say that about a camera that hasn't even been released yet? Booyah. This is what started it all. The GH1 was great, but this was greater. Not at release. Neither one was a great video camera at release. They were touted as being great at 17 megabits per second, but what happened? So a website called personalview.com, they patched this camera. You can say hacked, you can say patched, I really don't care, but the owner will say patched, as well as a lot of people who made the patches. I bought this camera right after I arrived in Japan. I'd been here for maybe 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, but basically I arrived here 13 years ago, right after the tsunami and the nuclear explosions, and I didn't know how long I'd be here, but I knew that I wanted to get some epic images of Japan while I was here. Video was more my focus at that time. My hat is hitting the microphone. But photos as well. So I did some research. I did have a budget. I did see there were some expensive DSLRs at the time, but they couldn't do really good video. But what happened basically is, while I was doing my research for the cameras, I came across this thread about this patch for the very new release. It was actually about the GH1 and the GH2, and I think worked on the actually I know it worked on like the G1 too. I think the G2 may have been released at that time as well. But basically what it was going to do was increase the bit rate and make the video much higher quality. Cinematic, I believe, was the term that was being used. And the thing is, I did notice very quickly in this forum that was talking about this, it was Personal View, a lot of the people were professional cinema creators. So I was like, okay, these guys know what they're talking about, and they're excited about this. Maybe this is the camera for me. So I found the camera. I was paying attention to the thread, and I realized that this looks like this is almost done. They weren't done with the patch yet. But I was like, oh, that's going to be done really, really soon. Okay, I'll buy the camera. I bought it with a kit lens, and a week later, booyah, the patch was finished, and I was able to download the patch, the firmware, and just put it, like, basically like putting a new firmware on your camera. You had to download this P-Tools on your computer, and then put the firmware on the memory card, and then upload it onto the camera. And seriously, it was night and day difference, because before we had lots of little jaggies and moire, anti-Elysian, I can't say these words because I've been in Japan reading all these words for 13 years, not speaking them. But the bottom line is, it's all gone, and you just had suddenly this rock solid image. It's 1080p, but it's rock solid. The patches progressed. I think their first ones were around 60 to 70 megabits per second, which was awesome. But they kept going, 100 megabits per second, 120, 130, 140, 150. Around 150, some of them started having issues with write speeds, like the memory cards weren't up to it. At that time, the fastest cards were the 95 megabit per second SanDisk ones. With those, it worked pretty well, but some of the earlier patches, like, it would crash after 10 seconds of recording. And if you didn't stop it before then, you lose your file. So it was really interesting, though, because it forced me to be very selective with my shots and actually progress. But shortly after, though, higher bitrate patches came out that could handle it, usually peaking at around 170 megabits per second. There were some that are, I believe, 220 megabits per second, but they weren't stable. But the image quality in those higher end patches were just phenomenal. You think about that, 200 megabits per second, that's at 1080p, that's equivalent of 800 megabits per second on full 4K resolution. So really phenomenal what they were doing with this 13-year-old camera. And this one has a broken ribbon cable. I want to fix that or get a new one and take it out for a test and show you what you can really do with this. This was kind of like the other Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. No, it didn't do RAW, but the actual quality of image was phenomenal, and everything about it was improved. It was just amazing. This is why Panasonic went forward. This is not their plan. They didn't plan on the GH4 at this point. The GH3 was a band-aid camera. It was released basically to make sure that they could still get sales, because they could no longer, think about that, 17 megabits per second. Do you think the GH3 would have been, even 100 megabits per second upon release? No way. 30 maybe, but personal view, through their work, they forced the envelope for all camera companies. Magic Lantern was happening with Canon as well. That was part of it too. But really, this was what pushed it, especially for Micro Four Thirds, because you could no longer release a Micro Four Thirds video-centric camera and be such subpar specs. The GH3, though technically lower bit rates, was on par for the most part. I still think this was the better image, because you had different looks in each one of those patches. There's a whole bunch of them, and some of them had kind of different colors and looks. And also some were geared more for sports. Really nice 720, 60 frames per second. I know it's laughable nowadays, but that was the thing then. And it was, for 720, 60p, one of the best images ever. But yeah, the GH3 had to have higher specs, and they made it a professional body. This was still the better camera, and GH3 did not do well as a result. So what happened next? The GH4. And anyone who had the GH4 can tell you that was the workhorse. That was the first Micro Four Thirds from release camera that was just booyah. That was actually the legitimate camera, and the specs were there, and I was tempted. But at that time, I still had this, and the price increase, which wasn't that much looking back. I think what was it, 1,200 at release or something. It wasn't that much, but this was fine. And I rocked this until it broke for like 6 or 7 years. Then I got a G7, which was basically a G4 without some of the higher end specs, but it was still 4K, very solid image. And I rocked that until I finally started really getting to photos, because with that G7 and with my Voigtlander lens, which I got a lot earlier on than this, I was really getting more into photos, so I got a Nikon Z6. Great camera. GH5 came out, and that was just like, oh, yes, image stabilization. The GH5S lost the stabilization, but some increased video specs. Panasonic could do no wrong. But all along, Phase Detect was trucking along. Sony released the A7S II, I believe, which was very good and very popular. Panasonic's popularity was starting to dwindle, especially when the Nikons came out and Fuji started to hit the scene, especially X-T3. Panasonic was stubborn. They stayed with contrast detect. But it was still highly popular. GH5 was one of the most popular content creator cameras ever. But as the full frame options rolled out, it wasn't that people wanted to switch to full frame, it was that they were offering more. They were offering more reliable autofocus, which for content creation, especially vlogging and this kind of thing, it made no sense to stick with Micro Four Thirds when you're getting not only a better sensor with higher dynamic range, but you're getting much more reliable autofocus. I was one of those that was like, Panasonic, come on. I want to go back to Panasonic because you know what Panasonic excels at too? Menus. The menus, I wish I could show you right now on this. The menus are so common sense, not simple, but just organized the way they should be, easy to navigate. They just look right. They feel right. They're good. So, everyone was waiting. They're like, okay, the GH6, surely it's gonna have phase detect, right? But actually, most people didn't think it was. They were very pessimistic because Panasonic had just denied, time and time again. They said, well, we've increased the algorithm with every new camera, every new release. The contrast detect algorithm has increased, and we believe it's better than ever. Of course, it was better than ever, but was it good enough to keep up with phase detect? No, absolutely not. Then somebody, after talking to somebody from Panasonic, who will always go unnamed, learned that phase detect was in fact coming. And he made a video on it, saying something silly like, I know something you don't know. But unfortunately, that somebody was led to believe that it was the GH6 that would have phase detect. And somebody was rightfully very excited and thought, okay, I'll let everyone know it's coming. Because A, everyone's going to be happy. B, it's going to boost my YouTube. And C, I'm excited. I might actually get the GH6 is what I was thinking. GH6 dropped. No phase detect. People hated on me. I don't care really. They made fun of me because I got a small channel and whatever. It is what it is. But I knew what I was told. So I was like, okay. It's coming. I know it's coming. But is it going to come on the full frame first, or there's a long overdue camera, the G9. G9 came months after the GH6 with phase detect. What the fuck were you thinking, Panasonic? Now, this is where this little small YouTube channel comes into play, because I think I know exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking of staying with contrast detect and releasing it on full frame. But somebody's little YouTube video got more attention than I expected. Now, maybe they hate me because they think I made this happen. I don't think so. I don't think they're that naive. But I think what happened was it showed them just how much everyone wanted phase detect. I think that they still were a little bit in the hole there, not really seeing the reality. What my video did was it gave people hope, and they got excited, and others talked about it more than they would have otherwise, because everyone was so pessimistic at this point. They're just like, nah, it's not going to happen. Panasonic is just never going to go to phase detect. They're just going to stay, they're going to die, and contrast detect was a common belief. A lot of people thought Panasonic is just on the way out because of their stubbornness. So did I affect sales? I doubt it. Maybe a little bit, but not really. But so Panasonic, I think they just say, okay, the GH6 is flopping, and obviously people wanted it. How about we put it in the G9 now? Maybe they're planning on releasing the G9 later. Maybe they weren't ready to release it. I don't know, because that could explain why the G9 went in the S5 body. But regardless, they released it with phase detect. GH6 people shaking their head. Obviously, that was the better camera now to get this G9 too, and a lot of people did. and you saw a lot of GH6s for sale on B&H used. Fast forward to the S5 II, what was it, S5 II, whatever, the full frame with phase detect. Okay, so now it's clear Panasonic is full in. They're coming. They're coming. And I saw it coming. I was like, okay, they're gonna do the same thing. The GH6, whether intentional or not, is now the Band-Aid camera. It's the camera to cover up things for now. You know, it did have way better contrast detect, and I give them to that. And I'm sorry if you guys were gonna stick with it. I don't think I affected it, but if I did, I'm sorry. But still, you did the right thing going phase detect, because. So, GH6, finally phase detect. This is why you're going to see suddenly lots and lots of people with a GH6. I don't know, but they might sell out, and they might sell out fast. Or Panasonic may have made a lot of them. We'll see. But yeah, bottom line is it's the camera for anyone that wants a hardy camera. It's not going to overheat. It's not going to let you down. It's going to be nicely weather sealed. And it's just going to get out of your way and let you do what you want to do, whatever that is. You know, you have so many options with that camera. And this is not a spec sheet review. I dropped the spec sheet. The spec sheet is on the floor. Do you want to know more about it? Do you really want to know? It does 120 frames per second in 4K, full HD up to 300 frames per second. That's in it's in 10-bit, but it's, you know, long GOP. If you want to do all intra, it's 240 frames per second, but still, it does 5.7K, it does 5.8K in open gate, so you can do anamorphic stuff with it. You can do so much with this. Battery life is a little bit low. If you want a full-on review with all the specs, Gerald and Dunn, go check them out. And Panasonic, send one to Casey of Camera Conspiracies, because he deserves it more than anyone. He has promoted your company more than you know. You might not get his negative sarcasm. It's funny. We get it. I understand. Japan management is sometimes sensitive to our silly sense of humor. Oh yeah, and it's got XLR. It's got 32-bit float. By the way, speaking of 32-bit float, it has it with an optional XLR unit, the DMW XLR2. And it looked really small in Gerald's review. It looked small compared to most of those units. Gerald praised it. Probably means it's good. And what else? I mean, what else can I say? It's got the specs. I'm not reading off a whole bunch of specs. It's got lots and lots of different bit rates, lots and lots of different codecs, all kinds of fancy stuff, okay? It's a nice thing. So, and the price, $2,000 is not cheap. A little bit more, but it's not cheap. But, and I would not have been okay with that price, you know, several years back, but it is the way the pricing is going. I don't approve of it. I think it's overpriced, but compared to other cameras, the price is in line and not that much. And you'll save a lot with lens prices, especially if you look at some of the older lenses. Make sure they're going to work with the phase detect autofocus, though. Look at Olympus lenses, because a lot of those are phase detect compatible, because Olympus went to phase detect a lot earlier than Panasonic. So affiliate links probably below. Check them out. Help me out. I don't think I've ever sold through affiliate links. I've stopped posting them, but I think I'll post some for this because it's going to be popular. You want to help a brother out, use the affiliate links. You really want to help a brother out, subscribe, like, share, comment below. Even if you're just trolling me, go ahead. Bring it on. I can take it. I find great humor in some of the troll comments. So, thank you for watching Film-Studio-Taku-in-Japan. If you want a really interesting camera, get a GH2 and play with it. It's still a workhorse. Not weather sealed, but I've taken that in typhoons and it still works. Thank you for watching Film-Studio-Taku-in-Japan. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.